people trust people. So let's present ourselves as that. Let's stay connected to the human side of things.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to welcome today's guest, Dr. Loretta Doan, Chief Executive Officer of the American Association of Immunologists, where she's advancing science, strengthening the immunology community, and elevating the role of evidence-based leadership in improving public health. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. First, Loretta is a bridge builder between science and real-world decision-making. She's built a career at the intersection of scientific excellence and public leadership, helping ensure the best science doesn't just stay in those academic journals, but that it gets out into the world and informs what happens in our communities. Second, she's elevated the voice of science in policy and public understanding. Before AAI, Loretta held senior roles at the American Association for Clinical Chemistry and the Endocrine Society, strengthening how scientific organizations engage policymakers and shifting the field from policy for science to science for policy. And lastly, Loretta pairs rigorous training with a communicator's instinct. With degrees in communications and chemistry, not a combination we always see, and a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, and then postdoctoral research at the National Institutes of Health, Loretta leads with clarity, credibility, and purpose, especially when the stakes are high, as they certainly have been in public health over the last several years. Loretta, you have been called a scientist and a communicator, again, two titles that don't always go together. You've been called a trusted bridge between immunology and society, and the leader behind ASAE award-winning science communication. Well, today we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I know you are just coming back from a big annual meeting, which will probably spur some interesting insights and conversation today. But so before we talk about, influence, I just want to start with the work itself. Listeners tuning in may not be familiar with the American Association of Immunologists and what you do. So tell us a little bit about the organization and why does your work matter so much right now?
Sure. Thank you for that. So the American Association of Immunologists is a professional society that represents more than 7,000 primarily research scientists who study every aspect of the immune system, whether that's human immune system, other immune systems, but every aspect of it. And the immune system is a pretty complicated system in the body. And so the field is pretty broad in terms of scientific interests that the members cover. But we have experts in every single area of immunology within AAI. And I have been here for approximately 3 years as the CEO at AAI. And one of the things that the leadership challenged me with when I came in was they wanted to be a more outward-facing organization, because what AAI found during the COVID pandemic is that even though we house and are home to the leading experts in immunology who had a lot to say about the COVID-19 pandemic and how we should address it, no one came to us to ask us how we should do that because we weren't positioned externally with the broader public. And so that was one of the things that was very important to the leadership when I came in. And I will say the entire organization is fully invested in moving in that direction to represent the field that we serve.
Loretta, I've heard that similar theme from some other organizations. They used to primarily just focus on communicating with, their own members and kind of the inside folks, and then realized there are these people out in the world who don't actually have the right expertise, that suddenly they've gotten followers and they've raised their voice and people are looking to them as the experts. And the real experts go, wait a minute, doing great work isn't enough. We actually have to communicate about our work. And I mean, you seem like the perfect person to have come on board with that charge from your leadership, from the board of directors, because like we talked about in your bio, you're a scientist, but you're also a communicator. I mean, you studied communications, and I don't know a lot of other folks who have that interesting combination in their background. Can you talk a little bit about the career that you built at the intersection of science and policy and communication, and then what really felt urgent about the moment when you stepped into this role of CEO, when the real experts got to get their message out, when the so-called experts are sometimes, winning the day and getting the most followers.
Yeah. So, I guess I'll back up a little bit and start with my communications degree. So early on, I was not interested in science as a high school student or a college student. I was very much focused on um, more connecting with people, I would say, which led me into communications with an emphasis on theater. I was driven. I wanted to have an impact, and when I was young, I thought I would do that through magnificent acting talent, and I could reach people and make their lives a little bit better when they come to see the show I'm in. That did not work out, and yet that desire to have an impact has stayed with me through every phase of my career and every career change that I've made. So when I went into science and started studying biochemistry at the PhD level, I went into that with the purpose of doing research in cancer biology. I wanted to have an impact in people's lives as patients. And as I got into my postdoctoral years and I realized that the work that I was drawn to as a scientist, this very basic, fundamental, foundational knowledge generation is what I was drawn to as a scientist. And that's exceptionally important, but it doesn't have an immediate impact. And I wanted to see the impact that I was having, in a shorter time frame. So then I started thinking about how I might marry up those two parts of my past and where I might be most effective in doing that. And I landed on science policy because I happened to be doing my postdoc in the Washington, D.C. area. And I learned that there is this field called science policy. So I started looking for jobs in science policy. I landed at the Endocrine Society, which was my first association position. And when I was there, what I realized is that what I finally sorted out for myself is that science policy is a multitude of things. And I think about it in those two large buckets of policy for science versus science for policy, which you alluded to earlier. And the Endocrine Society was doing a lot of policy for science work, and that's very inward focused work. That is, how do we establish policies that make our jobs easier? I wanted to do more of that science for policy work, which is more outward focused, which is how can we take the science that we're doing and the knowledge that we're generating and make it have a positive impact on the world around us. And so we transitioned that program. You will always do the policy for science work as an association. You have to do that. That's essential. But in addition to that, we started to do more science for policy work. And that's kind of where things started and how my career got going.
And when we think about um, science for policy versus policy for science, there's this idea of influence on the outside and influence on the inside. And I'd love to sort of touch on both of those with you. Maybe just to start on that. I mean, I know immunology, for example, can feel really abstract or even intimidating to those who are outside of the field. How do you and your colleagues explain immunology differently when you're speaking to policymakers versus scientists versus the general public?
Yeah, so I probably shouldn't admit this, but when I was doing my postdoctoral work, immunology was intimidating to me and I was studying it. So because it is so broad and because you might know everything there is to know about the issue that you're working on, there's an entire breadth of the immune system that I hadn't had full exposure to at that point in time. And I know even now scientists who are very established and they know a lot about one aspect of the immune system when they're talking to their colleagues, even who work on another aspect of the immune system, there is this kind of level setting of who knows what and where can we find that common language where we can speak together, both knowing, having coming from the same place. And I think that's one of the keys when you change audiences. One of the primary things you need to do is know your audience. to know your audience, you have to listen to your audience and learn what they know before you can even go into trying to communicate outwardly towards them, right? So I think there's a lot of listening, whether that's interpersonal, individual listening, or if it's on a larger scale where you are intentionally trying to learn about your audience before you start to tailor messages towards them.
Yeah, and I mean, I like that you said, "Well, maybe I shouldn't say this," but I was kind of intimidated by and actually, I think that's a great thing to say because it helps folks realize, hey, even somebody who has a PhD, this is not an easy topic. It's okay to not totally understand this and then, you know, start small.
The field of immunology is full of acronyms that immunologists know and no other field of science knows. So even if we go to like a cell biologist, they will be confused unless we explain this is what this acronym means and this is what this, molecule does, right? So it's a very complex field for sure.
You said, you have to explain it. I mean, that's a great entry point for us to talk about Immunology Explained,
Yeah.
which is the AAI's campaign
Yeah.
that you've launched, and I know that you've been hearing a lot about that, and wearing my social driver hat. We were very fortunate to get to partner with you all on that. Talk about why it was important to create the campaign Immunology Explained, and what have you learned? What have you seen? Would love to get more background on it.
Yeah, so that is that's a major point of pride for the association, I would say, because that is one of the things that the leadership and I started talking about very early on. There had been some preliminary work done with respect to public communications, but it became pretty clear pretty early on that we needed the right team in place to really advance immunology explained in the way that the organization wanted to do that. And so one of the things I've been thinking about in preparation for this is, what does it mean to be a chief influencer or a chief anything, right? Like chiefs, you can't do everything. So in my view, the most important thing that I've done in this position at AAI is find and hire the right team, listen to them, pay attention to them, let them do what they do well, and then they go out and they find the right partners to do what we need to do. And with Immunology Explained, we couldn't be more thrilled, both with the partnership with Social Driver, but also with what we've built internally and with our members, because one of the key areas of success for Immunology Explained is the fact that we engage more than 100 AAI members to be what we call Immunology Explained ambassadors. And they come and they create content for us. They write blogs, they do videos, they reach out to their own social networks. So they're creating all of this content from the position of expertise, but with the added value of having the AAI staff and our partners who know how to message things more for the public to build. You were talking about building bridges earlier, to build that bridge, to make it easier for the scientists to reach the public audience. And so we couldn't be more thrilled, and we're having smashing success. If I can keep going, if
Oh
that's
yeah,
okay. So,
hear more.
because we did just come back from our annual meeting, and it was wonderful to be there. It's always a very energized environment. There's great science. The community comes together. People are always excited to be there. This year, people were particularly excited about Immunology Explained and about the policy work that we're doing, to the extent that on the way there, we had about 90 Immunology Explained ambassadors, and we picked up 40 more on site. So our members are just eager to be a part of this. They see the value in communicating their science to the public and they're so connected to their
Yeah.
science and the work that they do. And for them to tell their own stories, it's just incredible.
One of the things I say a lot is faces are the new logos. We've learned, I mean, we can see articles, studies, charts, trust in institutions, in the media, in government. All of these things they're just downward sloping lines, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean people don't trust anybody. They trust other people. They trust their friends and neighbors. They trust somebody who has the ability to communicate with them and connect with them, who has a connection to, a similar background or location or experience. And so we're seeing the rise in influencers. And that can be an influencer with a capital I, somebody who this is their part of their profession. And I know you all have partnered with those types of influencers, or we also say creators. But then we also have influencers with a lowercase I, this 100 plus ambassadors that, they are just doing their job every day as immunologists,
Mm.
but they built up some kind of a community. It could be very small in quality. In some cases, it might be larger. But there are people who trust them and people who pay attention to what they say. And they have an opportunity to be a trusted messenger to get the right information out to the right people at the right time. And I know so many leaders are really thinking about this. They're seeing this happening and they're saying, how should we do that? How should we build our own ambassadors, our lowercase I influencers inside? And is it time that we try to work with trusted partners on the outside? And what does that look like? So I'd love it if you could share just a little bit more about what you've seen and learned in terms of your organization's willingness and then ability to go out and to build both types of relationships.
Yeah, I think so for one of the things that we do, this is kind of, process oriented, but we do have a committee of members who are dedicated primarily to this initiative. They vet the influencers who we partner with. We would never partner with anyone who makes any of our committee members uncomfortable, in any way. In fact, so far, we've had only positive response from the committee members when we've brought, potential partners, to them, and so we have partnered with I don't know if I can say them, but we've partnered with some pretty influential, for example, physicians who have followings on social media, and that has been a really successful, approach for us. So our chief communications person here, she likes to use the phrase, borrowing trust. So we borrow the trust of these influencers who do have, like you were saying, they have these followings of people who trust them. They've followed them enough to know that what they say makes sense to them and it seems reasonable. And so they trust them. So when they take the messages, they primarily, as far as I have seen, they primarily will bring standard messages from Immunology Explained and then point people back to our campaign. I think that's an important thing that has happened. These influencers have been really generous with their time and their support of Immunology Explained as a resource. And so that brings their followers into our fold so that they're spending time on our website, spending time on our dedicated social media channels. That's something I didn't mention, but we have dedicated social media channels just for this Immunology Explained initiative. And that's very important for an association like ours. That way we can keep the purely scientific and the content and the stuff for our own community in our own social media channels. And then the public facing stuff goes into the Immunology Explained social media channels. And it's a really nice setup that way.
Yeah, and I think that's worth underscoring. To your members, you want to talk about your annual meeting or, a scientific announcement, but to the public, you want to talk about, the resources that you have on Immunology Explained. And so in your case, it made sense to launch separate channels and or even on TikTok.
I think we need a TikTok dance. I think if anybody can come up with an immunology themed TikTok dance, I would love that.
Yeah, we'll have to get someone creative to think about the right dance move. Like, I don't know if it's what do they call, like the DNA ladder, like maybe a spinning around
Yeah.
double
Yeah,
helix.
that could work. That could work.
Yeah, maybe that
But to
will
reach
work.
like my daughter's generation, my daughter's 18 years old, and to reach her, even Immunology Explained is not gonna keep her attention right now. But if there could be an Immunology Explained TikTok dance, she might do it.
We have to look into it.
Yeah, let's
Well,
do it.
I also want to mention though, you did reference the creators that you've worked with and their doctors, Dr.
Yeah.
Beachgem, Dr. Knock,
Yes.
Dr. Megan Martin. And I think what's important to know about kind of how leaders like you are making it giving permission for your teams to do this type of thing. I think that that's so important is you're not only getting content from those creators, they know how to make content. They're experts in creating videos and writing posts. They do this all the time.
Yeah.
So you're leveraging that creativity to do something that's different from the standard content that you would create as an organization.
Yeah.
Then you're getting their reach. You're getting the message out to people who follow them because they like them and they like what they have to say. And then, like you said, you're getting that call to action and it's driven followers and engagement and drive people back to your website. And that was going to lead me to ask you, how do you as a leader, when you have a board who comes in and says, hey, we need to be more public facing, and then you say, look, part of my approach is hire the right people and let them lead the way on this. And then you have your annual meeting and you're getting ambassadors signed up. Um, those board members, they probably want to know, okay, Loretta, you did this. How do you know it's working? How do you tell us that this is actually effective? What are some of the things that are the go-tos for you?
Yeah. Well, we do, of course, have campaigns like structured campaigns that we can provide metrics from. It's interesting. One of the members of the executive committee actually asked me back in March for some metrics on Immunology Explained and how it's working. And we measured some campaigns that we did, I think, between October and February of this year. So in October, we relaunched the website. That's a part of the work that we did with Social Driver to relaunch the website to be much more interactive and engaging and to provide different channels for the content that our members were creating. Once we put these processes in place internally to be able to create more content on a regular basis, we needed to have a way to push that out onto the website and into the social channels. And so that was an amazing, the website looks great. And so once we relaunched the website and we ran some campaigns, I was able to present some numbers at the annual meeting. And in I think those 4 months, I can't remember exactly the number, but the number 13.5 million sticks in my mind. That's a huge reach for us. And
Yeah.
especially when we think about like we are for the size of organization we are and for the typical reticence of scientists to do this sort of thing, the council is fully on board, the membership is fully on board, and we're investing a lot of resources for us into this. But still, because my chief communications person comes from the corporate world, she's quick to point out it's still a low investment
Mm.
in the overall picture when you're trying to reach the public. And so 13.5 million people in 4 months for us is huge. That's huge. And I was just so happy to be able to show that kind of progress. And it is because of those partnerships that we have, not just with influencers, but with other organizations
Yeah.
who have alignment with us in terms of the patients or the physicians or the scientists who they serve. And so we've partnered with other organizations who are similarly focused on public communication, and that also has been very, very powerful for us too.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to find common values, even though you may not work on the same issue or represent the exact same professionals, but that you also believe in trusted content and helping to build, people's knowledge base and health and science and make sure it's accurate. That you can find ways to collaborate, and I think that
Yeah.
it's a really great way to partner.
Yeah, and if I can just take an aside here for a minute, it also is helping us in our advocacy work because this is the third scientific association I've worked for. All of them do congressional briefings. In my past two roles, we had a really hard time identifying, and we couldn't, in fact, identify patient advocates to go up on the Hill with us. AAI has done 3 congressional briefings in the past year and a half. Every single one had patient advocates, and it's
Oh, wow.
because we've established these partnerships with these like-minded organizations in other areas, like on the communications front, and then we leverage those to help our other work as well. And in fact, another aside, if I may, part of what we're doing here is we're looking at advocacy policy and communications as a whole and pulling it all together into a cohesive public affairs function for the organization so that the policy feeds into the advocacy advances the policy, and the communication supports and advances all of it, both the public communications, the communications internally with our own members, and to policymakers. So we've been able, the teams are just amazing and they work so well together. And I'm just really, really proud of what we've been able to accomplish in a very short period of time, actually.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Well, in the way technology has adapted, you get so much more out of it. It's almost essential to get that alignment that you just discussed, because if you put something on a website or you put something on social media, you can't just say, "Oh, this is only for this audience," and then I want to some another audience to see something completely different. We all have access to this information nowadays, and so that policy advocacy communication overlap, that's something that I've heard from a lot of our guests. It's like we really have to we have to break the silos down that our organizations used to have if we want to unlock the full potential of those opportunities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so on the theme of alignment, we've been talking a lot about external influence and getting the, message out and the success of doing that. And, congratulations, it's been really a fun partnership. I want to take it back to influence on the inside because one of the things that I know from working with so many leaders is you only get those external successes, you only get those advocates on the outside if you build champions on the inside and you get alignment from your board to your team to your members to be able to do this type of thing. And when you and I met before, I was really interested in some of the things that we discussed, kind of brass tack stuff about how you create alignment across internal and external stakeholders. I mean, even things just like how you structure an agenda for a meeting. So can you just talk a little bit about what you've learned on the internal alignment? Because I think that's a behind the scenes thing that people wouldn't necessarily know about or think about, but it's been an important part of the success to make it possible to have a successful Immunology Explained campaign.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me about the agenda thing because as you were setting this up, I was thinking I was really fortunate because I walked into a situation where the council and I were fully aligned. We already were fully aligned on the public communications front, um, especially on the public communications front, but also on the policy front and some other issues as well. Um, and so First, to build alignment with the broader community, the first thing we did was extensive surveys to learn where the community was and what they valued, what was important to them. And we didn't structure it this way, but reaching out to the public, countering misinformation, elevating the awareness of immunology, all of that rose to the top in those surveys. So again, fortunate the community was already aligned also with that. When it comes to some of the more, like, brass tack stuff that you were talking about, I think what you're referring to is the way I structure discussion topics for the council in that I don't go in with a predetermined outcome that I want, except the outcome that I want is for the council to make a decision and provide us direction. I may go in with a predetermined path that I think is best, and I may emphasize that and be transparent to them. I think this is best, but I will lay out all of the options and we will have a robust discussion and every voice in the room is heard. And then I work with the council chair, who is the AAI president. We call our board a council. So the AAI president and I will have worked together in advance to think about how we're going to bring the council to consensus. And I lean on the chair to bring the group to that consensus because he or she is the elected leader, he or she is their peer. And in the end, this association belongs to the members, and the members elected the council to lead it. So while I'm here and I'm sharing in their strategy making and I'm bringing my own perspective from my own background, in the end, it's their association, and they have to be comfortable and confident in the directions that we're taking. And so far, it's working. I think the council is still fully behind all of these efforts that we're undertaking, and it's been a lot. AAI has undertaken a tremendous transformation in the past 3 years, everything from our visual identity to the way we present ourselves externally, to the way we communicate with our members. And again, just coming back from the annual meeting, hearing all of the positive feedback, and the members are just really excited and engaged and happy about the direction the organization is going.
That's wonderful. And I want to just kind of double click, as they say, on one of the things you said, because I remember really kind of going, from our past conversation, putting multiple options on the agenda for discussion. And one of the things that we talked about was that I really learned from, and it's a little tactical thing that I think a lot of, our listeners could benefit from. If you put a binary choice on an agenda, it positions people to either be for or against it. And if you put multiple options out there and open it for discussion, it can give people the opportunity to share feedback without having to kind of take a side at that moment. And it can reduce defensiveness and create movement in the conversation. And I mean, remind me if I'm remembering and saying that right, but I
Yeah.
remember thinking, wow, what like a little thing that you could do in a meeting agenda that I could just apply right away that helps me with influence on the inside.
Yeah. You do have to be comfortable with messiness if you're going to do that because the discussion can go in multiple different directions. In my experience, because when we walk into the room as a staff and me and the president as a partnership, when we walk into that room, we have already discussed all of these options. So that's why we know they need to be discussed, right? And so I think, again, you have to be comfortable with listening and having those different perspectives spoken.
Yeah.
But I think in the end, it always has resulted in a better direction, a better outcome, a better product, whatever it is that we're talking about. So,
But the prep work has to be there is
well,
the other
prep work
piece.
has to be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The AAI staff, it makes them crazy when we're preparing for council meetings, but they're always happy with the outcome. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I wondered if you want to go back and talk a little bit. We kind of skipped over it, but just earlier in your career at the Endocrine Society, um, I know you worked to amplify a really major report and that there were some lessons learned there. And I just, wondered if you might want to talk about that a little bit because it feels like some of those lessons might have influenced what we've been talking about in terms of your work with AAI.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. I would love to talk about that. That's one of the things that has brought me a tremendous amount of, professional satisfaction was the project you're talking about where we, listened to our community of scientists who were making discoveries about the effects of exposure to environmental chemical on the endocrine system, and whether that was during development and then the effects showed up later in life, so with latent disease, whether it was developmental abnormalities, the premise was exposure to a very small amount of chemical at a key point during development has permanent influence and impact on the developing organism, whether that's a human or any other organism. At the time, the regulatory system was set up only to look at high level exposures and the effects of, do people become very sick? Do people die from this at a very high level? There was not a lot of discussion about how do we measure the impact of these low level cumulative exposures. And again, cumulative because we're exposed to multiple chemicals. So this is the work that our scientists, our members were doing. They were engaging in these policy discussions, but their voices were being drowned out. And so what we did as an organization was bring those scientists together and put into place a program whereby we could amplify that science and push out into the public domain for consideration in the regulatory processes. The way we started to go about that work is we created what we called a scientific statements program. And this, I believe, is still going on at the Endocrine Society today. The first scientific statement was on endocrine disrupting chemicals and their effect. So, a scientific statement, at least at the time, was essentially a comprehensive review of the literature with a set of recommendations at the end of the document to push that science out. And so our first one was on endocrine disrupting chemicals. I'm going to say EDCs from now on because it's easier. That EDC scientific statement, when we put it out, I heard from one of the scientists who had been in this realm for a couple of decades. He called that a watershed moment in the discourse around how these chemicals affect living organisms. And I felt like we had really done something to change at least the discourse, even if we weren't yet changing policy. From there, we established a global program in which we interacted not only with US policymakers, but with the EU policymakers through the WHO and the UN with global policymakers to make people aware of this side of the science that wasn't necessarily part of the conversation before. I believe that's still a key issue at the Endocrine Society, and I'm sure that they have made significant progress, but I haven't really been able to keep up with it the way I would have had I still been there because now it's all immunology all the time.
What I really like about that story, and I want to maybe just ask you to dive slightly deeper on is um, what you were doing wasn't just publishing a report. You really had to build trust so that you could break through the noise. And I'd just love to hear you talk maybe a little bit more about what you learned through that process about building trust and breaking through, because obviously that has informed your approach today.
Yeah, so in that circumstance, we had the benefit that our members were already trusted resources in these other settings. And so we as an organization borrowed their trust and influence
Right.
with the organizations that we wanted to then turn around and nurture relationships with. From there, we established our own relationships with individuals across the different international bodies that we were working with so that we could continue as an organization, even as those scientists maybe shifted their focus or, new scientists came into the fold. Once we established those relationships as an organization, then we just continued we were a trusted source because that's how professional societies like these work, right? Like integrity is essential, I think.
Yeah, and you've gone back several times to that line that I love about borrowing trust. And I think that
I
that's so
borrowed that statement.
it's fair to borrow the statement about borrowing trust. So
Yes.
we like that
Yeah.
and give
Yeah.
credit to I think it's Gwen, right?
Good
Your
one, yes.
chief communications officer.
Yeah.
When you think about importance of trust and credibility, I know we've talked a little bit about, it's not always being the loudest voice. It's about being that most trusted voice. And we've talked a little bit about building trust internally, scientists, for example, but also externally with others. Is there anything more that you'd like to just add about what you've learned about trust and credibility and doing that without necessarily having to be the loudest voice?
Yeah. I think something that is critical that kind of just has occurred to me over the past couple of days. It has crystallized, I guess, over the past couple of days is that I think it's essential to remain human throughout all of it, right? And to show up with authenticity, even as you're maybe changing your message for the different audiences because you understand the audiences, it still has to be an authentic message and it still has to reflect, we are all, like you were saying earlier, people trust people. So let let's do that. Let's present ourselves as that. Let's stay connected to the human side of things. I was sharing an anecdote with you earlier. I guess I can say it. Yesterday my daughter had a car accident, and so I was distracted by that leading into she's fine. She's healthy, she's fine, everything's okay. But that took time away from my professional endeavors of, you know, preparing for this conversation. At the same time, I think it freed me up to have a more authentic conversation with you because I wasn't thinking about it. All of this is central to what I do on a daily basis, so I really didn't need to think that much about it. And by being distracted by my humanness, I was able to kind of bring that into this conversation, which I think is a key to success in successful communications across the board.
Yeah, you and I both studied in one way or another communications in our early lives and in college. And when we're going through it as a student, learning about communications, there's an emphasis on polish and preparation and having the right messaging and building the right brand. And certainly these things are all really important. But I don't remember, being in a classroom or being in those environments and them talking about the importance of authenticity and that it's okay for sometimes things to be off the cuff and that the unpolished things might actually resonate more with people than the things that are polished. These are lessons we've learned,
Right.
And so I think it's really important that, like, yeah, you have to have the right brand logo and brand voice, but you also have to have that human element, and that can't be overly polished, especially today. Technology's changed a
Yeah.
little bit since I was studying communications, and we didn't have social media in those days,
Right.
so the
Right.
world has changed. But it's also, I think, a lesson that a lot of more seasoned leaders have learned that humanness, as you said it, really is the key to breaking through.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's easier to do as you progress in your career too, because when you're young, you are always thinking about how people are looking at you versus as you've progressed in your career and you've reached certain milestones and you know that the work speaks for itself. People aren't really thinking about me. They're thinking about the work that AAI is doing And the work speaks for itself. The work is, it's impactful, it's successful, and it is polished. The work is polished. So I think that that also makes a difference. Thinking back to my college years, we didn't even have cell phones. So the whole concept of social media was not even a thing at that time.
Things have changed so quickly, and they still
Yep.
are changing quickly,
Yep.
as we know, right? AI, we haven't talked about it today, but that's a big influence on
Yes, it is.
communications.
Yep, for sure.
Well, as we sort of close out, I want to just ask you one final question, Loretta. As you know, obviously, chief influencer is all about influence. And so I'd love for you to tell us, how do you define influence today, but also how that has changed for you across your career?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would think about something that we were just talking about today. I don't think at all about my own personal influence. To me, I have no ego in this. It's not about me making my mark. I feel like we didn't touch on this specifically, but when this job at AAI was available and it was right at the time of my career when I was looking for a chief officer position, and it's the field that I came from. And when I first started my association career at the Endocrine Society, I walked into that job and I thought, I love this job. This is an amazing job. The only way it could be better is if it was at AAI. And so when this job came open, I was just so excited to get back to this community, back to this essential science and help advance the science and the field as the leadership wished. And so that's where I lead from, a place of advancing others and advancing things that are more important than myself. So I really don't spend a lot of time now thinking about the perception of me as a person or as a leader or as a professional. I spend more time thinking about the impact that the team is having through the work that we're doing. And that's a big change. And again, I don't fault my younger self because when you're establishing yourself, you have to think about those things more than you do once you've reached, a certain position in your career. So I think that's probably the biggest difference. Don't get me wrong. I always wanted to have an impact. Earlier, it was more important to me to get personal recognition for that impact, and now I do not think about that at all.
It's kind of maybe a maturity that some people have in their career, that kind of humility and that transition to elevating others, which I know is something that you're really big on, that we've talked about before. And you certainly did that several times in this interview, talking about, your team and your membership, et cetera. It's such a great conversation. And when I think about just sort of what we covered today and some of the lessons on influence, we'll have to give, Gwen a shout out, but
Yes.
influence in many ways is about borrowing trust so that you can establish that credibility and breakthrough. And of course, there are many ways to establish that. We talked about influence on the inside and the outside. And I love how we were able to hear about influence on the outside through the success of your Immunology Explained campaign, how you have engaged more than 100 members to be ambassadors and their enthusiasm, reaching millions of people with your message to ensure that the public is informed about immunology, that the true experts are getting their message out and not the so-called experts who may not be accurate. But that's what we see on the outside, but that's only possible if you have the influence on the inside, if there's that alignment. And you had a board, a council, as you call it, that, established. We need to get ourselves out there more. And they found someone who happened to have not only the industry expertise, but also a communications background, which again is kind of unique to find the scientist communicator that you are, and get that alignment across your leadership, across your membership, across your team. And that means you've tried things that peer organizations haven't done yet. You've launched a new public facing brand with its own channels on places like TikTok. We're still waiting for the dance that we talked about.
We need
Make
it. Yeah.
where they are.
Yeah.
And you started working with capital I influencers like Dr. Beach Gem and others who have built an audience and can create content to inform people about Immunology Explained. And then you've also built those influencers with a lowercase I, these ambassadors. And, you just went into your meeting and got 40 more of them to sign up because they see the power of what you're doing. And you've created a platform that they can be part of, but they can reach their own communities through their own voice and in their own way. through their power of influence. So we talk about influence on the outside, influence on the inside, that alignment that is so important, and borrowing trust of others. Your team, your leadership, those folks on the outside is one of the important uh, ways of doing that. But of course, you can only borrow that trust if you have your own credibility and you build those partnerships in the right way. So what a cool journey, career journey that you've had. I'm so happy you
Yeah.
ended up place your dream job. That's
Yeah.
such a
Thank
thing.
you.
And I just really appreciate you sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thanks so much for having me.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.